Folks, in this video, we'll be giving away this PSA 10 Alt Art Magikarp and Wailord GX from Sun and Moon Team Up. Stay tuned for details on how you can enter in for a chance at this magnificent card. What's going on, everybody? Top 10 Pokemon back. Thank you for joining me as we review the top Pokemon card auctions of the week. This week, folks, we saw an absolute plethora of PSA 10 Alt Art Latios GX cards that came through in auction. We'll be reviewing the recently graded Pikachu Van Gogh promo cards. That's right, these cards have already been graded and are already flooding the market. And I will be showing you the most expensive Primeape card that has ever sold. Stay tuned for all of that and more. Folks, the sponsor of this week's auction recap, and who is also giving away this Alt Art Magikarp and Wailord GX card, it's none other than lowpopping.market. And folks, I am very excited to show you this. We'll be giving this card away. This is the PSA 10 Gem Mint Magikarp and Wailord Alt Art GX card from Sun and Moon Team Up. An absolutely beautiful card right here. One of my favorite alt arts of all time. I think it just pops the most. It is illustrated by none other than Ueyama himself. An absolutely gem mint example right here. This card has been selling for very close to $500 in auction lately, and we will be announcing the giveaway winner sometime very early November. So to be entered into this giveaway, you have to do three things. Join the Low Popping Discord, follow lowpopping.market on Instagram, and subscribe to Low Popping on YouTube. That's it. That's all you got to do. And all of those, of course, will be linked in the description below. And then, so that I'm able to pick a winner, leave a comment below letting me know what your all-time favorite Pokemon card is. Enter now so you don't miss your chance at this amazing giveaway. All right, folks, let's jump into the auction recap, starting off with some amazing modern sales. Some good, some kind of bad, but let's get into it here, starting off with this slew of Latios GX Alt Art cards from Team Up. We saw several PSA 10 examples come by. Here's one that sold for $1,423. Another one sold for $1,425. This one also sold for $1,425. Here's one that sold for $1,526. And then here's one that sold for $1,550. And then somehow this one snuck by, selling for only $1,110. So in the midst of all of these PSA 10 sales, this one by far sold for the least. So someone out there got a really good deal. Up next, we have a few other notable cards from Team Up. Here is the Gengar Mimikyu GX card that sold for $620. And then here is that Magikarp Wailord Alt Art card that sold this week for $465. And then again for $471.50. We have a few more very noteworthy modern cards. Here's a holographic Clefairy from Evolutions. The regular holos in PSA 10 are some of the only remaining really valuable cards from Evolutions that are graded. This one sold this week for $457. Up next, we saw this Vivid Voltage pre-release Staff Charizard holo. Sold as a PSA 10 for $860. Here we have a full art Pikachu card from the limited collection Master Battle set in PSA 10 that sold for $1,199. And then we saw a CGC 10 Pristine Alola Friends full art card that sold for $4,225. Now getting into a little bit of ugly business concerning some certain modern cards. Here we have a Charizard VMAX from Darkness Ablaze in PSA 10, selling this week for $73. Oh man, when this card first came out, it was selling for $400+ I actually bought a few of these cards around the $300 mark. One of the bigger mistakes in my investing career, as this card now sells for about $73. So turns out, really easy card to grade. We have a Charizard GX Rainbow Rare from Burning Shadows, sold for $2,375. And once again, this was a card that used to go for around $4,000, but lately the price of it has been fluctuating between $2,000 and $3,000, somewhere in that area. This week, selling on the lower end. And then we saw this Charizard GX from Hidden Fates, a card I never thought would decrease in value. It remained at the $1,000 mark for years. I thought it was just going to stay there forever. But this week it sold for a new low price of $540. And this card is similar to the Charizard VMAX from Darkness Ablaze. It has so many PSA 10s now available, so I guess it kind of makes sense for it to go down, but I didn't think it would go down this much this soon. But it's still a very iconic card, right? Speaking of iconic cards, we have this Moonbryon VMAX that got the CGC10 Gem Mint grade and sold for $640 this week. Here we have a lot of all the amazing rares from Vivid Voltage and Shining Fates, all in PSA 10, that sold for $167.50. And what's crazy about this particular auction, that if you would have seen this come by 2.5 years ago, this particular auction, it would have sold for thousands of dollars. I am not kidding. A lot of these amazing rares, especially like the Rayquaza, were selling for hundreds of dollars. So yeah, you can get the whole lot here for $167. That's crazy. Here we have a very out-of-place Black Label card. It's a Morpeko VMAX, I believe, from Sword and Shield. Rainbow Rare. Got the Black Label, sold this week for $152.50. And like I said, it's just kind of a weird card to have as a Black Label. I'm not sure. And then up next, of course, we had to cover these Pikachu Van Gogh promo cards that have already been graded, which blows my mind. I'm not going to go into the details of the Van Gogh exhibit fiasco involving all these cards, but we did see a few of these graded Pikachu cards come by. Here is one in PSA 9. This sold for $330, while a PSA 10 example sold this week for $1,375. And folks, let me just say, there are a slew of these cards coming through in auctions, so we will be covering this card for weeks to come. But yeah, the initial PSA 10 value thus far is over $1,300. What do you think about that? Up next, we're going to cover some sealed product on eBay. We stumbled across this XY Primal Clash booster box that sold for $475. Up next was a lot of vintage Japanese booster packs. I believe there are about 75 booster packs total. You got the Gym series, you got base set booster packs, Jungle looks like, sold for a grand total of $12,700. I'm assuming these aren't weighed. They might be, I don't know. And then lastly, for our sealed product, here is a first edition Neo Genesis box that sold for $26,200 this week. A couple notable vintage cards that came through. We saw several PSA 10 first edition holos from Fossil. Here we have a first edition Ditto in PSA 10, sold for $700. Hitmonlee here sold for $715, while this Raichu sold for $985. And then we saw two first edition Gengars come by. One sold for $3,050. The other one sold for $3,354. And then we saw a first edition Articuno that sold for $3,200. And then a first edition Dragonite sold for $3,750. One card from the Neo series, it was this BGS 9.5 first edition Lugia from Neo Genesis, sold for $4,949. And I've said this before, the disparity between this 9.5 and the BGS 10 pristine example is just out of this world. The last BGS 10 example sold for like $120,000 to $130,000, something like that. Absolutely crazy to compare it to the price of a BGS 9.5, am I right? From Aquapolis, we saw this Espeon Holo again, sells a PSA 10 for $922. And then we saw a reverse holo Crystal Charizard from Skyridge that sold for $3,002 as a Gem Mint 10. Here we saw a Dark Tyranitar from EX Team Rocket Returns. This is a reverse holo card. And folks, let's be honest, the reverse holos back then were so much better than the ones today. There was just so much more going on. I love the set name in the lower right hand side there. I love all the energy symbols in the background there. Awesome. This card sold for $620 this week. From Diamond and Pearl Secret Wonders, we saw another holographic Charizard that sold for $2,094. And then last but not least, well, maybe it is the least, was this Primeape card from EX Holon Phantoms in PSA 10 that sold this week for $17,100. This was most assuredly a legitimate sale. Up next were the cards from the PWCC weekly auction block. We have a PSA 10 Unlimited base set Chansey that came by. The lowest pop holo from base set sold for $1,650 this week. And then we saw several PSA 10 Shadowless base set holos come by. Here is a Hitmonchan, sold for $1,830. Here's a Ninetales that sold for $1,980. And then here is a Nidoking that also sold for $1,980. Here is a Shadowless Zapdos that sold for $2,310, while the Venusaur here sold for $2,370. We saw the Gyarados sell for $3,480, and then two PSA 10 Shadowless Alakazams. This one sold for $3,600. The other one sold for $4,080. Here we have a Shadowless Clefairy that sold for an even $6,000, while this Raichu here also sold for an even $6K. Up next from Neo Genesis, we saw this holographic unlimited Feraligatr. This is the number 5 Feraligatr. That sold as a PSA 10 for $2,040. And keep in mind, folks, there are only 7 PSA 10 copies that exist of this card. From Neo Revelation, we saw a first edition Ho-Oh that sold for $2,160. We saw a first edition Entei Holo from Neo Revelation in PSA 10 that sold for $5,520. Here we saw from Aquapolis a holographic Umbreon that sold for $2,760. And then here is a Gold Star Espeon from the Pop Series 5 in PSA 8 that sold for $3,000. And then Gold Star Umbreon also as a PSA 8 sold for $4,080. From Emerald set, we saw a Milotic EX that sold for $3,600. And then we saw this 1996 Bandai Vending Pikachu card in PSA 10 sell for $4,800 this week. And then here we saw a CGC 10 outperform a PSA 10 card. We have a CGC 10 Pristine Reverse Holo Crystal Charizard from Skyridge that sold for $4,080. And if you recall earlier in the video, a PSA 10 example sold for around $3,000. So there you go. And the final auction this week has to go to this PSA 10 Japanese Crystal Charizard that sold via PWCC auction for $15,000. Thank you so much for watching, folks. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to enter in for this chance at this Magikarp and Wailord card. Follow the instructions below. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. That's all I got. I will catch you all in my next one.